Hey, Chris, let's do another one.
You know what? I love it. Let's do another one.
So, Claris Talk AI, it's rolling. Got video, we got
Yes.
audio, we have
Yes.
everything.
Yep. We're
Um,
gonna have this one on YouTube and on podcast. So
yep,
for the folks that enjoy us in their ears, we'll have all sorts of good audio narration. But for those that like watching us on YouTube, we've even got a couple visuals this week, visual audio stuff.
slides.
So we'll have a multimedia experience for everybody. But first of all, excited to be here talking to you again, Matt. I really enjoyed our conversation last time around, and I look forward to continuing on that as far as the matters of Claris and AI are
hmm
concerned.
hmm So, we've got some stuff to talk about specifically. Let's see. You've got a couple of surprises coming, which is exciting. I want to talk about making a custom GPT with
Love it.
ChatGPT because it directly connects to some of the things we're talking about. In the last episode, we talked about prompt templates. And today we're talking about context, which, as it turns out, is exactly the same as context in FileMaker Pro.
There, so we don't even have to cover it. I think we're done.
It's
We'll just move on
that
to
was a
the next
joke.
thing.
That was one of those joke things that I try to do, but don't work. It's completely different, and I'll have you explain it.
Well, actually, you know what might be really interesting is for us to start with custom GPTs
Okay.
because the knowledge inside a GPT, and we can explain what these components are for those that haven't played around with it, is
hmm
what is context. And so why don't we talk a little bit first about custom GPTs, your experience, what you've created. I just created one that I'm really excited about that I think is really
Yeah.
practical. And we can tell
hmm
people how we're inserting our own proprietary information into those so that
hmm
it's not just a normal ChatGPT experience. And I think that'll be a great launching point for us to explain what context and retrieval is as it pertains to like API integrations into your custom business
Yeah,
applications.
exactly. So I'm gonna talk about mine.
Please.
So if you have the account, the one you pay 20 bucks a
ChatGPT
month for,
Plus. Yeah,
ChatGPT Plus.
ChatGPT Plus. Yep.
If you
Or
don't,
yeah, there's like team accounts too that you can buy at enterprise levels.
yeah,
But yeah, basically the paid accounts.
yeah, get it if you don't have it. So I am a newish dog owner. I think under a year. We have two rescue
Mine's a
dogs.
dog one too.
No way.
We
Okay, well,
we,
I'll
we
talk.
should rehearse more often. Wow. Okay, cool. You go with your
So
dog one
I've been
first.
having problems. Like one of our dogs pulls like crazy. She's just pulls so much. And the other one barks a lot. So they'll just, and I just want to be a really, really good dog dad, right? Because I
Oh
love
my
them. I
God.
give them all kinds of attention. I got to figure, I'm trying to figure out like, how do I feed them? How to, so I made a custom GPT and I put in, this is what I want. I am a 72-year-old. No,
Think dog
I said
ears
I'm
in
a,
dog ears.
an adult who has two rescue dogs living in rural Crete. And that right there is a
Awesome.
ton of information for like stuff going on, right?
Yep.
I live in the middle of nowhere for yeah, anybody who cares. Uh, and like these are my dogs, these are their ages, these are the kind of problems I'm having, these are the kind of things that I want. So I put like a description, like a paragraph of what I want, and then
And
specific questions that I might ask.
by the way, that those things you just described are what we
Mhm.
talked about in our, or those are great
Yep,
examples of
yep,
what we
yep.
talked about in the last episode. That's you were creating a
Prompt
prompt
template.
template, and part of a prompt template is describing who you are and what matters to you.
Right.
That's what we talked about last week in the user persona. You guys can go check out last week's episode, or 2 weeks ago's episode. But what you just described there is so important
Mhm.
because we are in so much control over the quality of the answers that we get out of these, out of like things like ChatGPT.
Yeah.
And what you just did there, like really narrowed what the possible responses could be to whatever
hmm
question will follow. So I just wanted to point out that that's an excellent example of how you should do this.
Yep. So uh so then I put some questions in like how do I know if I'm feeding my dog too much? How do I, how many times a day should I walk them to make sure they're getting enough exercise, stuff like that. And then now when I ask questions, it's much smarter. I did a separate one unrelated to that, by the way. I have to throw a little piece of candy in here for a specific FileMaker project. And you can load an XML, you can load the XML of a FileMaker database,
The FMXML,
the FMXML.
it's a lot of tokens, by the way.
Yeah, but you can put the whole thing into a custom GPT as a document, and then you can ask questions of it, which is kind of cool.
So
The
first of all,
DDRs, I'm talking about DDR
yeah,
XML.
oh, there we go. Yeah, the
Yeah.
FMXML honestly is like you would need a token window above 200,000 tokens to fit like one simple file's worth of FMXML. But the DDR is perfect, especially like the XML version because it's
Yeah.
described within the tags, or the HTML for that matter would work
Yeah.
too.
Yeah. Yeah.
So then you could ask questions of it. I think that's a brilliant use case. Now, a couple things just for those that aren't familiar with GPTs. what this is a developer like you just described, and I'll give a couple examples in a minute too, can go in and create two things. The
Hmm.
instruction or the like what you just described, I am a pet owner, this is
Hmm.
where I am, da 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 da,
Hmm.
and give it some instructions on what to do and what not to do. And then you can also provide what ChatGPT Plus describes as knowledge, which are documents, mostly PDFs. It really likes PDFs. Um, or whatever it is. I'll give some
Yeah.
examples of some of the knowledge too, but you put that knowledge in, and then you can choose on the GPT whether or not you also want to allow things like code interpreter if you're doing code,
Yeah.
web browsing, or
Yep.
even DALL-E. You could
Yep. Yep.
actually
Yep.
have
I
it
saw
create
that.
images. So one of the things I mentioned in our last episode was that I don't think GPTs that have web browsing are super useful.
Right.
What I meant by that, and now gives us a chance to clarify that, is that the person authoring the GPT has really almost no control then over what is
Hmm.
coming back. If you want
Yeah.
full control over what the user of your system, especially if it's just you, can do is do exactly like what you just described, but only upload documents that you want the user of your GPT to chat against, and
Right.
turn off web browsing. That way there's no
Yeah.
noise. All the information and truth comes from your document. And by the
Yep.
way, that's going to set up our conversation about context coming up here after our
Okay.
discussion about GPTs.
Ooh, so
So hopefully that makes sense.
signal to noise ratio.
So, oh my God, that's literally what.
Yeah.
So that's what my issue is with turning on web
Web
browsing
browsing.
is
Yeah.
noise. It's just a tremendous amount of noise. Now, if you're
Yeah.
using GPTs for search as an alternative to Googling things, then welcome to like the present times.
Hmm.
You should be doing that because Google is just fraught with noise. So you can narrow
Yeah.
down, like you can literally trigger it to browse by saying, can you go browse for this information? Like I was doing some research this
Mm.
morning and I actually wanted to see different citations and places I could go click through to look at. But when I'm building a GPT, I just want to talk against my data. Like, so for example, I have sort of a draft of a GPT called Ask Cris about FileMaker,
Hmm.
which is not browsing the internet because I don't care because you can just use
Yeah.
ChatGPT for that. What people are actually doing is asking my 25 years of transcripts of sessions and all the
Right.
videos I've ever done. Like I have
Yep.
all those. The problem is those are 2.5 million tokens worth of
Right.
information, and you can't fit that much into a GPT. So I had to
Right.
take just a small amount of it.
Hmm.
But when people are using that GPT, like which is publicly available,
Hmm.
and you can just search for Ask Cris about FileMaker if you want, or you can go to askcris.training, where I'll have a couple of those on there.
Yeah. Okay.
Then what you're doing is just asking questions of my knowledge base, which is very similar to this retrieval concept.
Hmm.
I don't want people to think it's me saying something when it's really some internet search that I
Right.
have no control over. So
Yeah. Yeah. That makes
that's
sense.
one example. Now, can
Tell me
I
about
do
your.
my
Yeah. Go
dog
ahead.
dad one?
That's exactly what I was going to ask for.
Okay. All right. So first of all, my dog, Liberty, who's sitting at my feet right now.
Hmm.
She's always in the booth here when I'm in here. Um, Unfortunately, I don't want to bring everybody down here, but she's a young pup, and we just found out that she has congestive heart failure, which is super sad.
Yeah.
And so really to be a good dog dad, and I'm not taking all the responsibility for this. My wife and I are in this together.
Hmm.
It was really important for us to be managing her health and what instructions were given, like managing it in the best way that we possibly can.
Right.
Right. So we had to take her in after an episode she had a few weeks ago. And, people are throwing paperwork at you and do this. And here's a bunch of information on these medicines. And this is the procedure we recommended. Da, 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 da. It's super overwhelming, right? And
Yeah.
so then we went into the cardiologist just last Friday, and I said to them, because like at work at iSolutions during my daily routine, everything is recorded.
Hmm.
Everything is recorded. So just know you're being recorded when you're talking with one of us. We tell you, but the point is we're AI transcribing every single conversation we have internally or with customers or whatever. So I did the
Wow.
same thing with the
Okay.
vet. So
Oh,
I
yeah.
pulled up my phone and I pulled up Otter AI and
Hmm.
I just said, look, I'm recording this because I don't want to miss any of it. So we had about a 45-minute conversation with the vet. They read through all the results of the echocardiogram,
Hmm.
where she's at, what some of the observations of the x-rays were, like a bunch of stuff that I would have just been like, I'm not paying attention. And then I got a stack of papers.
Yeah.
Then they gave us the stack of papers. Saturday morning, I took the transcription of our entire conversation with the cardiologist, every single document that we had, even her blood work, and I scanned all of them as PDFs and I put them into a custom GPT called
Hmm.
Libby RX. And tomorrow her respiratory rate and heart what is it called? How much your heart rate monitor, Bluetooth heart monitor shows
Yeah.
up, and I can actually there's an API. You can download them as CSV, but there's an API. So in your custom GPTs, there's a little thing called actions where you
I
can
saw
actually
that.
set up.
I wondered
Yeah,
about them.
so an example of that is you can set up an API endpoint. So I'm going to be collecting data on her respiratory rate and her heart rate, and I'm going to be able to have this like be able to refresh it however often I want to into my GPT. So I can literally say, "How's Libby's heart rate, for the past few days? Is she trending up?" And, or
Wow.
then I can actually turn on code interpreter and say, well, we've increased her medication. Is that having any effect on whatever? Like, so
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not going to publicize it so people can have it. But for
Hmm.
me, it's just a great way. Like literally the next morning after I finished it, I showed my wife and I just said, how's Libby? And then we ended up having like a 25-minute conversation with this GPT, with the
Hmm.
voice stuff turned on. Like
Oh
we
yeah.
had our own personal cardiologist. So, anyways, that's my dog dad GPT
Wow. Yeah.
version. And so, in that case, just to carry forward what we're learning here, the knowledge, it's ChatGPT and its amazing ability to talk like a human, but the information it's using is not its corpus of data. It doesn't know anything about my dog, Libby, or her condition, but all these documents do. So now I can actually ask very pointed questions of the knowledge base.
Right.
That's the context within my conversation with ChatGPT that we're having. So I think it's a really great, these GPTs are a great way to get started, creating your own fun ones if you
Yeah.
want to.
Yeah.
So
You can understand stuff. Okay. Okay. Context. But before we get there,
yes.
you had a fun thing. You had a fun thing. You
Mm,
teased me with some
uh-oh.
something Clarisy, something FileMakery. What was it?
Yeah, okay, totally random. I'm going to hold on one second. So, did you know that there is a movie out right now where like FileMaker is pretty much a character? And
The
do I
Barbie
have
movie,
your
right?
that is correct.
Um,
No, it's actually called, hold on, let me share with you.
that's a strange title.
Yes, it is a strange title, but so for those of you that are watching us on YouTube, I'm going to share a YouTube here. But for those of you that are listening, I'm going to play you a clip from the movie, and the movie is called Problemista. Let's take a listen to this little clip where FileMaker Pro is mentioned. Here we go, Matt. That's not a fair
Wait,
representation.
what?
Yeah. All right. I know you're thinking, wait, what is going on here? Okay, first of all, so that was Tilda Swinton, by the way, who
Whoa.
I saw this movie last weekend, and honestly it was a great movie. I watched it out of duty to
Mhm.
kind of see what was going on after this clip, came out a couple
Yeah.
weeks ago. So Claire, that was actually a tweet from Claris where they were highlighting that was the actor who I think is the writer too, Julio Torres. I admittedly didn't know who Julio Torres was, but he's a writer on SNL and he does these like really super
Hmm.
clever bits that I've come to learn. And pretty much all his funny bits from SNL over the past years have been folded into this movie. You know how they do that with
Mm-hmm.
SNL? Like they take a character or
Sure.
writer and they give them their own thing. So in that scene, we all have these experiences in our FileMaker lives. In that scene, he's getting a job, and the woman Tilda Swinton is saying, "Well, she has an art
Hmm.
collection, and her previous assistant insisted that she use FileMaker Pro because all the other galleries were using FileMaker Pro. So the
Right.
assistant built the database for her, and then the assistant left."
Hmm.
And so she's saying, does this sound familiar to you and all our listeners? Hey, my last person built this in FileMaker and they left. Do you know FileMaker? Can you take it over from here? So I thought maybe it was just that scene. But Matt, the entire movie is about this dilemma with getting her FileMaker Pro
That's
databases working.
crazy.
Even the final scene, like this like kind of heartwarming, sort of cute like resolution of the movie, like the final words that come out of the main character's mouth are about the FileMaker Pro databases. So, so I would say now my wife and I have different tastes in movies. She came out of that movie saying this is one of the best movies she's seen in a long time.
Hmm.
I found it to be, fun. I'm mostly like super tripped out about the FileMaker thing. By the way,
Yeah.
Matt, as trainers online, there are 2 scenes in there where the lead character does a Google search for FileMaker training, and fake results show up. So,
Oh, that'll be too
which
funny.
is probably good. Actually, my wife turns to me in the theater and she's like, are those your websites?" And I'm like, "Oh, how cute." She
Yeah,
thinks I actually am, have some control over Google.
that
But
would have been
then
hilarious.
there's another page
Yeah.
where like there's a huge screen that says FileMaker Pro
Hmm.
training page. It's like, I guess, supposed to be like the custom app academy or something. So
Yeah.
again, that is Julio Torres, who I think had a lot to do with writing the movie. It had to. Like it's like just got all of
Yeah.
his stuff in it. And the movie is called Problemista. I'm in the Los Angeles area, so I was able to find it in theater. I think Andy Lacates, our friend at Claris,
Hmm.
he texted me the other day telling me he also saw it in the theater out in Atlanta. So I think it's in those big markets. I'm not sure when it gets to
Yeah.
Crete,
Yeah.
but
Never.
at the very at the very least, by the end of the year, you'll be able to stream that. So
I haven't
super
actually
fun.
seen, I've lived here for almost 2 years and I've yet to see a movie in the country.
Oh,
So if there's a movie theater, maybe there's one in the 45-minute town away from me, Rethemno, but I don't know. I got the TV and I've got Netflix, so I just wait.
yeah, it'll be streaming probably by the end of the year, but definitely check it out. I mean, it's just crazy seeing.
Yeah.
I mean, like the last point I'll make on it is, as FileMaker people over the years, like how many times when they like show the screen on a TV or movie and you're
Hmm.
like and they're like showing the software and you're like part of you in your mind is like, oh, is it FileMaker? You're like
Yeah.
looking at the Chrome and trying to see maybe a
Yeah.
menu or something, and we just
Or
never
when you
see it.
walk back from the bathroom on a plane and you're looking at people with their notebook, like who's using FileMaker?
Or as a matter of fact, speaking of dog dad, we were getting one of our dogs a photo. Oh my God, a photo session with one of the dogs, and the woman had her laptop out and she's taking all our customer information. And I peeked at
Yeah.
it in the same manner we talked about, and it was FileMaker. And I'm like, "Oh my God, you use FileMaker?" And she's like, "It was basically like that scene you just saw." She's like, "Oh my God,
Yeah.
my last assistant. Can't figure this out." She's like, "I'll swap you some photo session credits for helping me out with this thing." So I was like, "Great."
Nice.
So keep looking at people's laptops just in case. You never know.
Yeah, true. Okay, context. Let's switch
Yes.
gears. So as obviously as trainers in FileMaker, we teach the importance of the concept of context a ton. Um, Little tips like as you're writing a script that changes layouts and changes context, always have the layout behind the script workspace on the same layout that you're actually working with. So the context is the same. So that when you do set field, set variable, it's getting information from the place that's correct without you having to change context. Okay.
Yeah, and I think probably for all the young kids out there, because we're just a couple of the old generation, and with the thousands of 20 somethings that are out there in our community who probably don't even know why context is a thing in FileMaker.
Hmm.
It actually, I mean, just as for curiosity's sake, it really wasn't a thing when FileMaker was flat file, right? Because whatever file you're in,
That was the context.
you had one
Yeah.
table. So
Yeah.
that's what your table. It really, if you put the word table in front of context, it probably makes sense in FileMaker.
Yeah, that's true.
But then when we went with FileMaker 7 and like many tables, one file, but you still just had one interface component, you have to establish where you are. Basically, where are you in the relationship graph at any given time is
Hmm.
really what context is.
Yeah,
It's the
which
table
tog.
context. Now,
Yeah.
in fairness, scripts have context, like where am I,
Hmm.
what layout am I currently on? Calculations have context if you're defining
Yep.
calculations that have related values, and even the layouts themselves do, of course. But really, we're talking it's mostly so anyways, that part is
Yeah.
super important for just FileMaker people to understand. So for the
Hmm.
next 15 minutes or so, forget everything you know about context because this is different. So compartmentalize it over, put it over
Talk to me.
here. And
We're switching
context,
context.
we oh my God, we're getting so meta.
Yeah.
Oh
Wow.
my God, in meta, it makes
Just
language
just
models.
just keep going.
It just keeps spiraling down the rabbit hole.
That's not what I
Um,
mean.
let's back up to again, we won't rehash the details of what we talked about in our last episode, but it was a really important starting point for communicating with language models, whether it be through APIs or just through a chat interface or something. We talked about prompt templates last week, and a prompt template is much like you talked about, like defining who you are, why the question you're about to pose is meaningful, what constraints you can add to it, examples of the type of the output and the format or the tone that you're looking for, maybe like tons of guidelines to follow, whatever it is, tons of stuff. So the whole takeaway was there's a bunch of stuff that you put in there. And the main point is you, as the person writing the prompt, are in complete control over how good of an answer you get back and how truthful that answer is, right? The number one thing we talked about last week, and that I continue to pound the podium on when I'm talking to people about AI for business, not dog dad stuff or any of the stuff that we just talked about before, but business implementations, which is what our community is all about, right? Is not relying on the language model for truth, right? So no one who has tried ChatGPT once and then says, oh, forget this AI thing, I'm not interested, it's dumb. None of those people are listening to us right now, because you have to foster a curiosity about what this could do. So for the people that are, the main takeaway is, if you're building a business application, and then I'm going to propose the problem, and then we're going to unravel how context is the answer. The problem is, if you're building a business application where you've integrated one of the language models, GPT-4, let's say, and all you're doing is asking it a question and it's supplying answers back to you, like from the general corpus of ChatGPT-ness, like you're doing it wrong. I'm just going to make a bold statement that that's not how you should be using language models for business. What you should, in fact, do is ask questions of your data, get that answer, and then send your question or your prompt template, your question and that data over to the language model for it to do its thing. Now, we'll just put on the shelf that doing its thing means, and it's a big deal, talking like a human, carrying on a conversation, managing conversational memory. There's a lot that it's doing, but we don't care what it knows about our topic. In our last episode, you were talking about hepatitis trends over a certain number of years. And I had posed to you, when you ask that question of your FileMaker database, the data to answer that question lives in your FileMaker database. You can create a found set of data by querying your FileMaker database that has those answers, but it's not written in a cool paragraph with maybe visualizations and in a summary statement. The summary statement, cool paragraph visualizations part, the language model can do that. But the truth to answer your question comes from your data. So to linger on that, it's very similar to what we just talked about before, where we were building GPTs and we're saying, don't go look out into your corpus of data or on the internet. Focus on these lab reports of this, cardiologist report only, and find the answer there. That is what is called context.
So if you make a custom GPT, so you can put the questions in, you can put the background in, where does context fit into that?
Context in the framework of the custom GPT, for those who've used it or who are about to, is what they refer to as knowledge. It's literally a little section that says knowledge, and you can upload the documents.
Got it.
But additionally, so that's one way that you can introduce context. The second way to introduce context that in the GPT is in those actions I just described. I can do an API call. So that's where I'm getting the heart rate monitor and breathing rates from the API of the Bluetooth collar for the dog. So I'm actually doing two different what are called retrieval techniques. One is providing documents, and then the second is API calls, and that is exclusively where the answers to the questions I'll be asking that GPT are coming from. That is context, and that the verb is retrieval.
All right, light bulb moment. Because everything about this that we talk about, the thing going off in my head is, okay, great. How do I connect it to FileMaker? Okay, great. How do I connect it to FileMaker? Okay, if we used a custom GPT, which we've been talking about, and it's really, really easy to understand, and you use an action and you make an API call to your FileMaker database, would then you be able to ask a question and have it actually construct an API request to go get the answer?
Absolutely.
Oh, man.
So the question that's bouncing around in your head about how do we make this relevant to FileMaker and for our deployments is absolutely what everybody should be thinking. That's what we
Yes.
do. We build applications for business. Our answers, our truth, as I like to say, I know it sounds a little esoteric, but truth is really important to me when I'm working with our clients on AI implementations.
Yeah. Well, I know you well, so I know that the only truth that matters to you is the lowercase t kind, but we'll just move along.
I was waiting for that. But we have a responsibility. Okay, well let's put it this way.
Mhm.
Um, you build you and I had this conversation in another podcast about dashboards. Remember when when I was like, "Oh, I hate dashboards," right?
Oh yeah.
But there's something I think people get like when you're looking at a dashboard in your FileMaker application or whatever
hmm
application it
hmm
is,
hmm
you do you have any issues about is this information true or believable? And I'm baiting, and the answer is no, you don't. Like most people just look at the dashboard and go, "Oh, well, all this stuff happened already, right?"
hmm
So why would I question whether or not it's truthful? Like all I'm looking at
Of
is like
course.
last year's invoices and what my totals were and trends.
Or today's
So
things I'm supposed to be doing,
or
or yeah.
today's all of it is truth because why? Because we know where the source of that data comes from. Generally, as the constructors of those systems, we are also responsible for having built them. So,
hmm
we take on the responsibility for truth all the time. So, some people could say like garbage in, garbage out, but I think we're all pretty mature in our development efforts that we're not putting garbage in, right? So whatever's in that database, we feel comfortable that there's truth there, right?
Yeah, yeah, I
So
agree.
so in the context of sending an API call to a language model, if I was going to ask something like write a description for a product, okay? Let's say I tried that without context. And in
hmm
my prompt, I literally just say, write me a description for a product. I'm being silly and overly simple
hmm
because the language model would go, description for a product. You mean any product? I can just make up any product that I want.
hmm
And then it just writes back and it comes back with like a toy. Like in that Problemista movie, he's a toy designer and he has a toy called, you said Barbie.
Mm.
And it's a Barbie that has her fingers crossed behind her back. I know there's a joke in there somewhere, whatever, right? So let's
Yeah,
say you get the description of a toy, a
yeah,
Barbie with, and you're like, no, I make industrial helmets. Like, why are you giving me a Barbie description? So then you
yeah.
go, well, let me explain to it. I make industrial helmets.
Right.
This is the product. And so then, like, for those on YouTube, I'm sharing on screen here an example of creating something that would be similar to like a let function in your in your curl request that you're sending along with your API call to language model.
hmm
You can send it a bunch of information. So for example, let's say you have a product identifier, a description, or some keywords that are involved with a product description. Go do a search of your FileMaker database for the product you want to write a description for, pull the values from those fields over, and send those along with your prompt template and your question or your command, write me a product description. Now you're not going to get the Barbie with her fingers crossed behind her. You're going to
Right.
get the actual product description
For
for the
your
thing
industry.
for your yeah, for your
Exactly.
product. And so you have control over which product you send over. You can do a whole found set, whatever it is. The
Right.
verb in that case is you need to retrieve the correct information to answer your question, if in fact you're asking a question, or even if it's a command, go create a product description isn't a question,
Yeah.
but I want to send the answers to it. So let's pause for a moment there and make sure that that makes sense.
Yeah, it totally does. The thing that I'm thinking about is basically you're using the ChatGPT as an engine to get to get information from your data in a way that you couldn't do it before. Is that, I don't know,
Yeah, I
it's
mean,
oversimplified?
well, no, I think no, I think I can even make it simpler than that. It doesn't even have to do any of the retrieval itself. We're searching the FileMaker database for those fields in that one product record before
Right.
we even communicate with the language model.
Yeah. So this, I guess this would be if you do it like the traditional API method where you have a script, like a button in FileMaker that you click that does something. and then you
Yeah.
type something into a field to say, come up with a description for this product category, whatever.
And you're on a
Um,
product. Now that we're
mhm,
back into FileMaker context,
right.
you're on a product record. And in your curl request, like I'm showing to the YouTube folks, I
Yeah.
can say, go to these 5 different fields and go grab the data in those fields and send that along with my command that says, write a product description.
Right.
And then the rest of like who I am, what persona I have, I'm in a marketing
Right.
department and I do that.
All
All that
that goes as
information then
well.
gets sent over.
Yeah.
Now, so the question would be, as a thought experiment,
Hmm.
if we send all that information over and all the prompt template stuff over, do we expect that we're going to get a better answer than if we just said, write me a product description? Of
No.
course. Of course. No more thought
Then
experiments.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, obviously. And I think what we all have to discover is how much better, right? How magic
Yep.
better. Yeah.
Well, yes. The other part, right. So in short, send it all the information. I used I use a terminology in a lot of my presentations where I say context like this retrieval process
Hmm.
is like a student taking an open book exam. Like if you're just trying to
Hmm.
give the language model an exam, like you're testing it with your question, do you think it's going to do better if you give it the resources with all the answers in it, or do you think it's going to do better if it's just guessing from its own memory? So my point is
Hmm.
always make it open book exams. Um, the other part, Matt, that is super important um, is that like so in the for the YouTube folks, I'm showing something called retrieval. So I mentioned that this
Hmm.
verb of going and getting the information before you send your API call to the language model, this is called retrieval. In the AI space, it is specifically referred to as retrieval augmented generation, which means you go and retrieve something, and then you are asking the language model to generate something, but you're augmenting it with your data. I don't
Right.
love retrieval augmented generation. That came about
Yeah.
years after we've been doing this, but
Good. Not a good
people call it,
acronym either.
the acronym sucks. It's
Right.
RAG. And I'm saying that because that's what everybody calls it out there. So if you see RAG somewhere in the context of AI, that's what they're
Hmm.
talking about. But let's just call it retrieval.
All right.
So the idea of asking a question, let me just pose to you this, Matt. You're a company, you have your own HR policies, and you go ask a language model. Let's say it's ChatGPT or Claude, which by the way is my new Claude 3 Opus is my new favorite
Hmm.
LLM, by the way. You ask it, what is our vacation policy? What would you expect to come back?
Uh, Junk, if it's only going to go to the internet, there's no possible way that it could know.
Exactly.
And
So
if I
for
worked
those,
for like a really big company and the vacation policy is online, I could say, what is my vacation policy? I work at HP, then it might
right,
actually be
but
able to,
yes,
but,
but you
but
don't
it
know
might be
what.
not
So
yours. Yeah.
well, even if you work at HP and it is
Hmm.
online, you have no idea which version of that one is in the corpus of data. Like a lot of
Right.
these have a cutoff point. Like it could, even if it's just last October 2023 or something, right? It
Right.
still might not be your policy as of today. So instead, don't let it go ask questions of the internet or its corpus of data that it was trained on. The
Right.
data that a language model is, this is a profound statement I'm going to make.
Hmm.
The data that a language model is trained on has nothing to do with what a language model does. That's just how it learned to learn. That's literally it. And that's how it learned how to talk like humans. And yes, of course, by accident, it got a bunch of intelligence and it can write cool things for you and help you write papers and stuff and maybe actually answer some questions with truth. But when it comes to your business,
Yeah.
it's
Well,
a
it can do,
fool's errand to
I mean, I
rely
think
on
it can do
that.
way more than that. You know,
Well, and so
it, it
by the
can,
way,
it
there's
can, it can translate and speak every language and understand things,
yes.
can look up etymology and can compare things.
Yep.
Yeah, it does
And
way
it can,
more than that based on like the, knowledge out in the world that you wouldn't live or die if it was wrong. Um,
correct. Well, and by the way, that's why for creative endeavors like writing screenplays or short stories or
mhm.
poems or whatever, or creating imagery, there's no truth. Is there a right or wrong answer when you're writing a poem? No.
Yeah.
It's just be
Well, yeah,
creative.
there
And
there
so
are wrong answers. My like
actually,
my
let's not explore any of those, Matt.
like my favorite
Like
my favorite
Hickory Dickory
teacher.
Dock.
Yeah. Well, I mean, my favorite teacher says like if you there's no one right answer to like something in music or something like that, but there's a lot of wrong answers.
Ooh, I love that. Okay, so perfect. You just thank you for making that example I gave even smarter and more relevant. So in the creative endeavors, the model doesn't use any of its data. Its truth doesn't matter. But learning how humans talk and what they think is
Hmm.
funny and what they think is beautiful, like that is what that a massive amount of data, why it actually mattered.
Hmm.
But if you go ask a question, what is my vacation policy? And for those on YouTube, you can actually see I'm sharing, I'll narrate this, but
Hmm.
there's 4 different cells here in this thing I'm showing. And I've asked that question, what is our vacation policy, to ChatGPT, Bard, and Anthropic Claude, not Claude 3, my new favorite, but the previous version. And then down in the bottom right-hand corner, Matt, I asked that question to Mistral, which is a open source model. Um, the 3, the big guys, the ChatGPT, the Bard, and the Anthropic, this is kind of important too. Did they, Matt, you interpret to the audio users on the podcast what they said. They didn't give an answer. Instead, they
Yeah,
what?
I'm
They
sorry. I don't have access to your vacation
yes.
policy. I do not have that information about your company's vacation or any company's vacation. I'm an AI assistant.
So they're basically saying, why are
I,
you asking me? I don't know anything about your company.
oh,
So
but then
that
I
should be
love
your
it's
first
like,
step.
I apologize. Here's what you can do though. Search your company's knowledge base. Look at your
Yeah.
employee handbook. It's like, wow, I hadn't thought of
Yeah.
that.
Well,
Ask your
there,
HR department.
so what that is actually like human reinforced, like fine
Right, right, right.
tuning that these model operate. Now, sometimes this can go awry. We're not going to get into that, but that is
Yeah,
definitely part of the discourse right now when it goes wrong. But this is just saying, look, we don't want to hallucinate. That's this concept of hallucination,
right.
which, by the way, is the bottom right corner cell that says, oh, your company vacation policy as follows. And it just goes on and answers a question. That
Employees are
is not
entitled
the
to 2 weeks
right.
paid vacation.
Yeah, that's
Vacation
not the
must be
right
taken
answer.
within the calendar year.
So
Employees
that
may
is actually
request.
kind of interesting because the open source models like Mistral, they don't have this like kind of reinforcement training or like
Mm-hmm.
the big guys saying, hey, if somebody asks this question, tell them we don't have the answer. They don't have that as much as the big ones do. So the
Yeah.
problem, all of these are problematic, right? So instead, what if you did something like, and by the way, this is another example of
The
uh,
bottom right one looked like it, to me, it looked like it was trained. I mean, that was legit hallucination. You'd
that was a
make, you'd be,
legit hallucination. Here's another
you'd be
example
in
of you see
trouble if
it.
that's the one you followed.
Yeah, and I'm showing another example of that. What is our vacation policy in the right hand side is also looks like the right
Yeah.
answer, but it's not. So now this is a example, Matt, just showing you what is our vacation policy. I'm actually asking Mistral, and I'm just going to tell you that what we're seeing on screen for those that are watching on YouTube is the correct answer, with the citation to the most recent employee handbook where it
Hmm.
found that answer. So what the difference there is instead of asking the corpus of data that the language model was trained on, what the answer is, I am searching through a bunch of documents that we've vectorized, and I'm coming up with the right answer. Now, granted, it doesn't have this paragraph. This paragraph is not coming back as the search results. As a matter of fact, what's
Hmm.
coming back in the search results is just like a bunch of non sequiturs that might be the correct answer. That's what vector databases do. This
Yeah.
whole concept of embeddings. And so I am just feeding to the language model the question and a bunch of things where the answer is probably in there that a human's not going to find very useful. And then I go, hey, language model, you go make this sound good. So it goes and makes it into this paragraph that we're seeing on screen. That is what
Right.
the job of the language model really is in our business integrations, is to talk to humans and do fantastical things like you mentioned before, but not provide truth.
Right. Yeah. This is also kind of bad. And I think it probably had some things wrong. Right. I was just reading through and it said like you could take up to 10 days. Uh, they could be consecutive or not. And then it said something in there. It's like you can only ask for vacation up to 30 days in advance. And I'm thinking, I don't think that's right. I don't think there would be a company that would not allow you to schedule a vacation 6 months in advance. I think that would be really, really dumb policy.
Well,
Anyway.
probably why you would want it to actually search your employee handbooks, not like the general internet at large,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so I think to kind of pause for a moment here and like talk about what we've learned so far
Hmm.
is that if you tried using AI once and you got the wrong answer and then you just left satisfied that this is one more thing I don't have to learn, sorry to inform you, but
Yeah,
you were doing it right, and you have a
yeah.
lot to learn. And retrieval is the thing that you should be concentrating on.
Okay.
Now, real quick to just fly through a couple of these concepts. Retrieval, we talked about searching your FileMaker database.
Hmm.
You can do an actual search, come back with found sets, grab the data and send that on in your curl request with your API call to a language model.
Mm-hmm.
You can be in the context of a record and just make reference to some fields that are on the record that you have established context and send your API call with that in your curl request to
Mm-hmm.
the language model from that record context. Or you can do like a SQL query, or you can do a vector database search, which is a huge concept here.
This is something we should talk about in the next episode because
Let's
we're
do
running
that.
out of
Let's
time here.
talk about vector databases in our next episode because it is such an
Big
important
thing.
part of retrieval. Yeah, the last thing that we'll just say is that another method of retrieval is simply API calls.
Mm-hmm.
Just like I was talking about in my dog's the heart
Right.
monitor,
Yeah.
I'm making an API call to the data, and that is being used as context. I'm retrieving that data and using it as context so it can answer my questions properly.
All right. What I love about our conversations is I have 3 or 4 things to go try until we talk again.
Awesome.
So it's going to be really fun.
My apologies, but then also super
Oh, no.
awesome at the same
No,
time.
there's nothing to, I mean, uh, I'm really happy to be at a time when you have a great tool for learning things and there's a reason to learn new things, especially at my advanced age of 30 something or
Amen.
50 something.
I mostly am learning when I'm interacting with AI on a personal level.
Right.
And not just the on the nose stuff like teaching myself Python and
Mm-hmm.
now I can do notebooks and all that
Mm-hmm.
kind of stuff. And I'm way too old and irrelevant of a guy to be learning new things from a tech standpoint, but just increasing my knowledge or at
I
the very
mean, but
least
you're not. You just said
relying.
you learned Python. That's a new thing from a tech standpoint. Hello.
No, it totally is. But
Yeah.
like outside of having these tools at my disposal, I absolutely wouldn't have done that, Matt. Like
Right. Right. Right.
a great example I'll give you is I was just talking to one of my coworkers and I was like showing him this use case I was using AI for, and I go, yeah, I don't really read much anymore, and he laughs at me, and I go, no,
Yeah.
actually, it's true. I don't really read anything anymore, but I consume written materials more at a level more than I've ever done in my entire like professional and
Mm-hmm.
personal life. Like what I used to do all the time is just put a book on a list, put it on my Audible and never listen to it or read it.
Mm-hmm.
Or and my by the way,
Yeah, I'm kind
I
of the
don't want
opposite of that.
my wife to watch this because I think she's like you. She reads constantly and she's always talking to me about how
Yeah,
like reading on my iPad doesn't count as reading. And but
it does.
nowadays
Anyway,
she reads on her iPad too.
oh.
Just here to
Well, I
report that.
mean,
But
if you're reading text, that's reading. And if you're listening
thank
to an
you.
audiobook, that's reading, in my
Thank you.
opinion. You're
Okay, I'm
getting
gonna
your
play this. I'll play this back for her the next time she accuses me of
yeah.
not reading. But the
Yeah,
important
because I
part
listen
is,
to like 80 to 100 books a year on Audible. Or actually I use Libby now because it's free and great.
oh, it's my dog's name. Well, but I consume information at a rate that I wasn't
Right.
even able to do so when I was in my 20s, and I had like a fresh brain that I hadn't killed half of it already. So
Yeah,
that is what AI
that's
is
also
for.
not
Like,
true. So your brain can keep learning until you're yeah.
thank God.
I can tell you some books to read, but I know you wouldn't read them.
No, what I would do is I would summarize them and then have conversations with them. So, for
Yeah.
example, at my DevCon or my Engage presentation,
Hmm.
I took the entire transcript and my speaker notes from my session and I built the GPT and I put those in as knowledge. And so, what I was telling people is you could go
Meta.
watch the video or listen to me talk or just ask questions of it,
Right.
like sit and have a conversation with it. So like, for example, for me, a paper came out that I thought was really important recently. I mean, this happens. I do this literally all the time.
Hmm.
I didn't get a chance to read the paper. The paper was like, I'm going to show you something that's actually really trippy in a second because I
Yeah.
want our
Who,
listeners to see it.
who
We'll
reads
finish with it.
papers, by the way? I think this is actually an important thing, right? Because this is science, right? This
Yes.
is absolutely data science in a way that hasn't really impacted the lives of FileMaker uh, developers much. There hasn't been books that you could read that actually made your development life that much better. But now actually understanding the research
Uh,
that's happening in papers, I think is legit. And especially with
I
simple
would,
titles like this.
yeah. So like, for example, automated unit testing improvement of using large language models at Meta. It's hard enough to read the title, let
Hmm.
alone the entire paper. I'm not going to read this paper. I'll maybe read the abstract or whatever. But instead, what I did the other day, this was back in February. Oh yeah, here it is. Oh, Valentine's wasn't on that day. I'll tell you,
Ancient
I was
news
not.
last month.
Yeah, it's so old school. But what I did is I fed this in to, we have a sort of proprietary AI retrieval system here. I fed it in to it and I go, all right, and then I popped it up on my iPad and I turned on the voice part of it and I
Mhm.
said, okay, well, I'm going to make dinner, but I'm going to have a conversation with this paper. Tell me what the top line things are. Da 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 da. And then I go, would I be able to use this in this project, or does this mean blah 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 when they talk about
Mhm.
that? Matt, I'm having a conversation with the paper. I'm learning all about it. And next thing I know, it's like 44 minutes later, I've had this conversation with a paper. So I guess that's what I'm talking about when I say about
Right.
consuming information, right? By the way, are you ready for something? I think this might be a fun way to
Maybe.
maybe, hopefully not
Bring it on.
terrify everybody.
Bring
Okay.
it on.
All right. So look at
And
what
then we got to
just
wrap.
came out. Yep, we're going to wrap. Look at what just came out this past week. Can you see this here?
Make inferences with computer
Yes.
vision model.
Okay, so
Okay.
this is 2 minutes. We're gonna
Minute YouTube video.
yes, we're gonna let this person describe what's happening, and for those that are watching on YouTube, they can watch it. But then we're gonna talk about what this means as FileMaker folks and just software engineers ourselves, and then we're gonna sign off and let people ruminate on this. So
Before we
please
do that,
join.
though, I'm going to make one
Yeah.
plug. You
Oh
are
no,
doing something on April 10th.
I'm doing something on April 10th, the Claris AI webinar, hosted by Ronnie Rios. And I think they're going to announce, I think by the time people are making their way to this podcast, they will have announced it already. So you can go to, I think, claris.com and events or something along those
Okay.
lines, or you'll probably all
Yeah.
get an
Yeah.
email, but check it out on April 10th. I look
Okay.
forward to people checking that out.
Play the
So,
video.
so our last thing
Yeah.
is Devin, the AI software assistant, and what we're about to hear is a person narrating the experience where Devin took a job posting for a software engineer off of Upwork.com and it performed the task. So let's take a listen real quick.
Okay.
Here at Cognition AI, we were playing around with whether or not Devin could start a side hustle on Upwork. So here's actual real job from Upwork, where the client wants to set up this computer vision model, which actually looks quite interesting.
It's a
It's
repo.
very difficult to set up. I'm not sure how I would start doing this, but you give the task to Devin and ask Devin to figure it out. And
So
make
he
mistakes.
has fed it a
Devin
post
immediately
from
goes,
Upwork.com and he has given it a GitHub repo. It is now going and forking the repo, reading through the requirements of the project on
Devin's actually updating the code.
on Upwork and now creating its own code. Let's listen in.
He continues with this, loading and importing packages. You can see that actually downloads images from the internet to run through the model. But you can see here that there are actually some issues that come across.
So it's using like coding models like Codex, which is available from GPT-4, or Llama Code, which is the open source version, to be actually do coding. Now it encounters errors.
Here, where Devin is adding these statements to track where the data flows. And Devin continues to do this until Devin understands how everything's working and actually then updates the code.
So what it did was it did testing, problem solving, updated its own code, and then fixed the code. Now it goes on to find examples on the internet of other images it can use for
Until
testing.
it runs the image model across all these rows across the world. And we can ask for a report from Devin. At which point, Devin sends over some sample images of roads with damage marked out and a nice TXT file explaining Devin's work and the different kinds of outputs of the model. Good.
Okay, so AI software engineer. This really caused some people to freak out in the AI world this past week. And maybe we're inducing the same reaction within the FileMaker community, but essentially what we just saw there in about 2 minutes, it was a scrubbed up maybe 10 minutes, was feed an AI model a project and a software engineering project, and it completed it. And frankly, it did it better than most humans do because it actually tested it and provided
Right.
provided a README report showing that it actually worked. Your
I mean, we
thoughts
saw
on
a
what you
human still feed it a lot of stuff.
Oh, that human fed it the description of on the Upwork page. That was all that was fed to it.
Yeah. So, which makes me wonder, why Upwork, maybe they should just have this as part of their service. Like if you
Well,
post something, we automatic run it through AI and see if it can
yeah,
solve it, so you don't have to put it out there.
it was funny because that's a company called Cognition that came out with that tool, and they're trying to get people to subscribe to it.
Hmm.
It's not yet available for subscription, but a lot of the people on Twitter were saying, "Why don't you just have it do all the Upwork jobs? You'll probably make
Yeah.
more money doing that." So the concept is AI as a programmer.
Hmm. Also, there was a
Now,
really, really clear spec for that project.
yes, and it
Um,
wasn't like a 50-page blueprint.
Yeah.
So just so we're clear, that was a pretty clear, very clear. And it was a GitHub repo, so it was very obvious where it can
Right.
find all the information and do
Hmm.
all that. But it created it in 10 minutes,
Right.
as opposed to even a really good programmer who's intended to be, who's probably value billing. Otherwise, they wouldn't do it very quick, anyways.
Hmm.
So that would probably take at least hours, right? More than 10 minutes. So
Right.
the first thought is that um, I don't think this should worry FileMaker people as much because, and this is not to be reductive, but we don't code in FileMaker, right? So I don't
You
think we have
don't,
to worry
maybe.
about. well,
We used that
I mean,
same
it's
joke last time, I think.
yeah, we actually did. So, anyways, just a little food for thought. This is what's going on in the AI community. I think it's a zygote of things to come, but there's no question. So, in case people aren't aware, there are models, Codex and Llama Code are just two
Mhm.
examples of them that are finely tuned just for coding purposes, mostly for like JavaScript, web,
Yeah.
Python, like all that kind of stuff, like not FileMaker, but
Mhm.
it should be noted that like this isn't like a crypto thing that's just going to go away. Like this is the
Right.
beginning of it. And that paper I was, by the way, that I was talking about was a testing mechanism that actually creates tons and tons of testing use cases for coding purposes and for going through your testing process. So all these things are becoming automated at a
Mhm.
breakneck speed. I think we need to be aware of them just for the fact that programming might be different, meaning we will all have our own assistant and we'll be able to be that much more productive in our
Yeah.
efforts in the future. I
I
think
can
that's the important
definitely
part.
visualize. I mean, right before we started, I was working on a really hairy script. I can absolutely visualize AI doing that instead of me doing it. Because you say that FileMaker is not coding, but FileMaker script languages, it's XML, right? You can copy and paste that.
Yep.
And there's other tools to do that where you can actually see it. You could put on the clipboard and say, redo this and make it XML that's compatible with FileMaker, and then you could paste it in as script steps, and you have a script that does the thing.
I predict that
Doesn't do that yet.
No, I predict though the speculation that we're having on this topic right now is going to seem silly and trivial in about a year.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And calculations, same thing, right? I mean, it can
Yep.
already do pretty well now, but it does a lot of hallucination because I haven't fed it like the FileMaker user manual and to say this is what you can do, this is what you can't.
Correct.
Um,
Which is why, for example, maybe we'll get that. Well, maybe
mhm.
Claris or someone will feed all of these things into a finely tuned model that actually was previously tuned for coding and will actually be the companion that we all
Yeah,
need. So in upcoming episodes, amongst other things, we're going to be talking about, well, we actually mentioned earlier that we'll talk
yeah,
about vector databases
yeah,
and
yeah.
embeddings later. I think as June approaches, we'll also probably talk about what we expect to see from Apple. And I think there's a pretty good bet that Xcode is going to have some sort of a Copilot flavor to it as well. And so that way, now we're finally starting to see these Copilot or these coding assistants move into our Apple paradigms and maybe even into a subsidiary. So who knows what might be coming soon as far as tools to make what we're doing faster. But the takeaway is, so in case everyone's freaking out, this is just about building Iron Man suits that embellish human capabilities and give us superpowers. This isn't about robots replacing humans. In my
Right.
in my estimation, it's all about the analogy I give is this. For us old timers, Matt, when email first came out, okay, kids, earmuffs. When email first came out, the promise was you're gonna, those 4 calls you make all day, the 4 communications you have all day
Mhm.
at work, you're gonna be able to do those before 9 a.m. and then you can go golfing. No, the reality of it is now you do 40 or 50 communications with all the messaging that you have. It's just what's
Mhm.
expected of one individual has just that expectation has grown as far as productivity. It didn't put us out of a job, I think it's the exact same thing when it comes to coding,
Mhm.
that what we're able to accomplish in a single day, that expectation and the reality of it is just going to increase
Yeah.
somewhat exponentially. And
It'll amplify what you can do as a human.
amplify. Love it. We did it. So number 2 is in the books. In an upcoming episode, we will likely be talking about vectorization, embeddings, all
Yep.
sorts of cool techniques, and semantic matching, some
Mhm.
amazing stuff along those lines. And then whatever the latest and greatest stuff is. And yeah, for those interested, I'll look forward to having you join a webinar on April 10th on behalf of Claris, and hopefully we'll have a bunch of other cool stuff that people can join in and check us out on as well too. But
We'll be
for
having
now,
sample downloads too on your website of downloadable files that you can actually get kind of kickstarted on this, because that's one of the other difficult things that a lot of
I think
FileMaker
that's a good
developers are facing.
That's a good call. I think we will probably do a better job as time goes by of putting links to things like that in our as they call them, show notes on the podcast, and then
Mhm.
the descriptions on YouTube.
Right.
So for those that have us in your ears, go check us out on YouTube. We put a bunch of visuals in there. For those that checked us out on YouTube, next time you're walking the dog or making dinner, put us in your ears. We'd
Podcast,
love
yeah.
to keep you company. So and that is another Claris Talk AI in the books. Coming at you.
All right. I'll talk to you soon.
Fun as always. Thanks, Matt.